um, tonight's live stream. It's titled "An Invisible Cause of a Visible Effect," and I'll be kind of looking into the idea of subtler dimensions and how one can approach them. At least through my approach. The reason I was inspired to do this is that I was watching this video on the Dalai Lama speaking about reincarnation, and it was like a bunch of neurologists were like asking him questions, and he was explaining his experience of like his own experience as also with the in alignment with Buddhist thought and the Buddhist view on the subtlety of the mind and how memories can pass on from one lifetime to another lifetime if that is the case, right? So this was a very interesting notion for me. It was an interesting idea. Just like, and I felt like I have a sort. It's not that I kind of feel it's one of those things where it's like this phenomena that's going on that different people are looking at it and they're seeing different things. Now these people have come to a place where they can uh, in some sense have an integrative outcome rather than just an individual outcome. So pretty much I want to share my views on how I think reality occurs beyond the veil of our sensory perception. In one sense, we have to acknowledge the dilemma with language and our ability to even reach for truths that transcend a dualistic boundary. Because if you notice, like most people, they're attaining their meaning and their validation. It's as if like they have a story of life that consists of different things they've seen in this life, in this existence that they've accepted, different modes of how they have expectation for reality to be or appear. And what really has an expectation is this accumulation, this kind of snowballed sense of identity based on different experiences and decisions of the being, leading the being into a sort of shape. Okay, so as I'm speaking to you, I'm not, it's not like my words and how I even speak or everything I'm saying, these are all sculpted through time and through different things that I've gone through. And every person is experiencing life if they're alive, right? You're living, you're alive. Maybe you don't have perhaps the meaning found or all of it figured out, but it's very important to realize and distinguish where we draw the boundary between something being self-generated and something being generated as a result of the environment on yourself. So if neurologists ask me, what is this subtler mind that Buddhism speaks about? I could say that I find that it's this personal access to an impersonal reality. That means as if the person begins through the more sophisticated texture of their mind or that idea self of themselves. It's like, how can I tell you? Many people on this planet, since we're kids, we just question and we want to know. And a lot of kids around the world, their favorite word, when they're growing up, is why. Like why? Like as if like an endless questioning. You know, so this endless questioning is very interesting because we as a civilization, our survival was dependent on our knowledge. Like the person who knew more got by more. You know what I mean? So we are a civilization that is in some sense have value knowledge and value knowing. Now, because we're all a group and we're a collective and whatnot, right? So we have different structures, different ways of knowing colliding, and in some sense reshaping and becoming something new. And then it comes into the domain of language, where language is like it's like the meeting point of your abstract self, your subjective self, with your objective self. When a person speaks, the moment they speak, they're not just the physical body. Those words are originating out of a certain presupposed structure and view of the world. So, kind of what I'm getting to is that we have to realize that at some point of me trying to explain this, obviously it will transcend the language threshold. The language threshold is a concept I've created, and this concept When it came to me, it was very profound. It came to me early on because I knew that some things were undescribable or were unspeakable. That means we can try as hard as we want to create words for it, but because of its dynamism or instantaneity or vastness of scale or validity, it's as if like we can't comprehend. We can't accept truths that we can't understand, right? This is in some sense common, right? But we have to also wonder what the hell the point of the concept of an explorer is, right? So, out of a sort of responsibility for your existential opportunity to contribute to a sort of figuring something out of the world, out of our auspicious intent for our collective, we shall try to analyze and dive into an individual way of seeing this. So, pretty much, guys, the reason I'm kind of like uh, emphasizing this a lot is that because what I'm going to say is some people are going to hear it and they're going to think that's it, like that's only it. And it's never just that's only it. Life is changing all the time. But it's worthy, it makes sense to share. So I'll share it with you. All right. Life begins in a moment. So I'm going to begin from this moment and try and explain to you how my subtle experience of a subtler self is occurring simultaneously as I'm here. You see, as I'm right now as I'm speaking to you, dear listener, I'm in a room. I'm physically in a room. Okay, I'm indoors. Okay. Now, just like how I'm in this room, my body is in this room, my idea of myself as I'm speaking to you right now, like the idea I have of who I think I am when I close my eyes, right? Or that image that comes to me of who I am when, like when I wonder about it with no sense, like limited sensory perception. Like when that question comes, for me, it's as if there is activity occurring in a physical room of existence, and there seems to be activity occurring in a subtler abstract room where the idea of myself has to also acknowledge that it's somewhere, right? What I mean by that is that you're like when someone daydreams, like, let's say someone's like, sitting on a park bench and it's raining and they have an umbrella, but they just close their eyes for a moment and just imagine themselves in the Bahamas, in that millionaire luxury kind of like thing, resort. So imagine the person visualizes he's there. Now we notice that the attention of this guy who's on a park bench has gone to a way of that man existing in thought that is more interesting. When your thoughts are more interesting than direct reality, the person daydreams. When if something is super boring and you can't get out of that situation, like kids in classroom, like the teacher is saying something but is saying it in such a boring way as if like he's being like whipped to say that something that he doesn't even know. So for me, it's like one of those things where you notice a sort of activity occurring even as I'm speaking right now. In like as I'm speaking to you right now, my experience of these words, like as I'm saying it's as if they're appearing out of nowhere, but the nowhere they appear out of is a sort of an ocean of familiarity I have with phenomena as a conscious being, right? A conscious being doesn't necessarily mean an embodied being. That means like I kind of find like where this is pretty much the deeper meaning of or the deeper progression of life. You start off as a kid, you get in that has a personality, that personality also has a name, and based on the functioning of this physical body, this name of yours, and this what do you call it, the abstract self, the idea, that your subjective existence, right? So these three things, we keep it at that, and we don't want to move further, right? That's mainstream, right? As you grow, but as one reaches the end of physical experience, I find, and just pretty much, this is how I really sincerely feel this is what's happening, is that, or this is what will happen, or in some sense, and what I mean by that is that you start off as an individualized personality and physical body, into moving more through time, into experiencing a collective presence. Presence is a collective presence that is not physical. It's as if you've been in the physical room too long, and after eons the being roars that it demands in your reality, right? There's many ways that a living being can attain self-awareness. The biggest thing is to realize that since this is a changing universe, that means we have to acknowledge a changing self, and we also have to acknowledge, in order to be able to acknowledge a changing self, there has to be a changeless observer of that change. That means, if somebody like makes a half court shot, if there's no one there to see it, you can't believe that guy. Do you see what I mean? Do you see? So, as I'm speaking to you right now, my view goes on to being like this, where as one taps into a sort of rhythm and flow, and kind of, I don't want to say alignment, but you're abiding by just how things are, how change is already happening, one grounds not just their ethical existence, but their, how would I finish the sentence? There's a part of me that's physical. There's a part of me that is aware that it's being aware, it's physical, and that seems to be non physical. It seems to not have a location, rather, the appearance of the intelligence of a wave or an ocean, as if we, our physical matter individualizes itself, it moves towards being a particle, but how can I tell you, like, um, there's a part, the subjective realm moves towards a sort of collectivism, a sort of integration into a greater sense of being. So one can say that we as living creatures have a primal urge to be greater than the condition we are not designed to be satisfied in, right? So what that means is, like, you see so many superheroes around the world have different traits, different abilities, right? But if some aliens came to the human species and they're like, okay, what's their greatest ability? And let's say they stripped all our science, or everything, just like, not our science, but just like, they weren't judging us based on our technology, they were judging us based on just the ability of the human being. You'll see it is an ability to generate hope and possibility, even though the odds are impossible. That's one thing that the human species has, in some sense, built into it. That if survival gets tough, you will fight to live. And if you're willing to fight to live, you must also learn to appreciate life after the wars are over. The greatest warriors are not the ones who just want to destroy everybody on the battlefield. Those usually become close to great but blind warriors. The ones who, people who just want power, like, you're gonna feel good, but you're gonna feel blind, and that's worse than good. So I'll tell you this. It's those warriors who they in their mind have already envisioned the peace and how they're at home. So this general, like, everybody in the battlefield is bewildered and scared and all this, but for this man, it's as if he's serious. He's fighting in the war, but his inner state is tuned to an image of his reality already having succeeded. So when you act like you've succeeded, then something unique happens. You see, in that acting as if you have succeeded, your mind is trying to improvise a way of that success being real. So for me, life has been a very profound moment that's just happening. And it's happening in as many ways as my mind can extract relationships. So the relationships that I have found to be useful is that, like, when I was a young kid, like really young, like age 8 or 9, we had a book. Like, my father had a book in the in his bookshelf. It was called Mind, Body, and Spirit. So immediately I had a model to classify the self as if there's the physical body, then there's the mind, then there's the soul. And the way I kind of was like, it's very cool. I was raised, in a strangely like semi-religious, semi-spiritual family, right? And the spiritual side was very unique because from an early on, I had no fear of life because I felt I was an eternal being. Like, a lot of children feel like nothing can go wrong, and they play along. Like, they have a certain built level of trust, right? This is why the worst way a child can feel like bad or their self-esteem gets messed up is that if they feel people can't trust them, and if they feel they can't trust others. These two things usually mess up a kid. So parents got to be careful. But so pretty much there came this trio, this structure of the body, mind, soul, and someone very playfully once told me, I don't know, this is probably not accurate and will be denied by many, but somebody said like the same classification for body, mind, soul was like, uh, what was it, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, something like that, right? Some unique classification, as if in many different cultures, they've all acknowledged, okay, there's this physical thing, then there's somewhere where the personality of the individual is coming from, let's call it mind, then there's something that's beyond the conceivable ability of the self-aware creature. Because in a changing world, beliefs are just a game, is it not? It's like our in 1,000 years, let's say 10,000 years, let's say humanity miraculously continues, and it continues. Wow, like there's too many images, I can't word them, but like pretty much, um, once you take a responsibility for novelty in your experience, that you're not just responsible for what has happened to you or just what will happen to you or what is happening. When you realize you take the responsibility of a moment of being, mind becomes a dream, and the physical body is a reality, mind is a dream. And then the soul, for me, this was the kind of profound thing, that when I looked at these ancient texts to figure out, okay, let's see what the world has said about the soul, right? I came into this very profound, how can I tell you, like, our search goes so deep that eventually the questions we had at the beginning dissolve into a new world of exposure, as if like the person who was studying something so much suddenly noticed something that others hadn't and suddenly became like the next Einstein, right? At some point, these three classifications of myself eventually merged into an attributeless, instantaneous moment of being that I could not define, and it was chaotic because I was raised as a person to value knowledge and to want to know things, but to come to the conclusion that the one who is knowing it cannot be known was a sort of chaotic once I've gone through them, right? The simple parts of my life have given me the ability to value the hardship. For me, life is like I'm just this moment of phenomena and these elements in motion, and these elements in motion are given an opportunity to be aware of themselves in many ways, to a point where we are beginning to realize we are awakening to our collective self, which is in some sense a future just pool of energy. That's probably a bad way of saying it. I have this notion that, okay, here, I gotta build up to this. Once I realize visibility is an effect of a car, of an, like when I realized the spectrum of time is the visible effect of, let's say, an invisible cause, which is an instantaneous moment, when an instantaneous self-acknowledgement of just me as the whole moment rather than an aspect of the moment, rather than as a character in a game, I just acknowledge the whole game as the whole thing, right? I quickly tapped into the state where, as if I remember I was like, it was kind of like, I guess, kind of like cute and funny. Like when I think about it, that when I was younger, I thought I had a relationship with angels, right? But not like religion, like the religious angels or something. For me, they came across as the same relationship I had with what I felt to be a sort of invisible other, like an invisible sort of presence in the room. Like that experience I had, it was very playful because you're scared of the unknown until you realize you are the unknown. Once you realize you're the unknown, you give your lifetime an ability to be function through moments where time is is in the boundary of an infinite free will. So what that means is, before anybody tells you what to do, you're the one telling yourself what to do. Do you see what I mean? And since you're the one telling yourself what to do, you're the one who's making conclusions on reality, and you're the one who has access to your worldview, right? So I consider that it's fascinating because when I give these talks online and somebody, you know, let's say the blessed winds of karma are just, grant an audience, when somebody hears this, it's as if like a concept inspired out of my world, like a satellite or like a spaceship is traveling to your reality, and based on how you welcome the concept, right? Because once reality comes to a moment where you don't need duality to exist, you immediately transition out of your subjective. It pretty much the I like it's like this. It's like there was this ancient wisdom quote by the Sufi mystic 700 years ago named Hafez, and this was a profound thing back in the day, in a spiritual context. And the idea of it was, you gotta die before you die. And what does that mean? That meant, the way that Sufi dervish was saying it was that the idea of you that thinks it's gonna die must die before you actually physically die. Because that idea of you that is constantly making conclusions on who you feel to be is I don't want to say imposter, that's too extreme, but it's like it's something you have, as if you have drawn an artwork from a long ago, and but you have been staring at nothing other than this artwork, and somebody comes and tells you like, stop looking at that same artwork, don't allow belief to limit your eyes, rather allow belief to make your eyes limitless. You take away the past's painting away from your present moment, and you take away the future's promises away from your present moment. You come to a moment of being where you are actually just present. As silence is paid attention to, As you pay attention to silence and stillness, automatically the body begins to function through a subtler intelligence to calm and settle itself. We have magnified into this relationship that we are a thought for too long. And once you realize there's a aspect of your experience that is the space prior to even the thought being allowed to emerge, you begin getting your reality updates to the depth of your experience rather than, you know, um, outer marketed strategies towards self-realization. I'm pretty much that guy in like a busy marketplace of like these enlightened and like, you know, these metaphysical videos, right? And I'm just pretty much telling people, guys, okay, I've put on I've taken a booth here, but what's more important is not what these ideas. It is an awareness that no longer needs to be a conditional self. That means you experience yourself in a way that doesn't have to be based on a certain condition to be correct. And this requires your experience and study of the unconditional. And you got to look at things that unconditionally happened, that have happened to you in this life, and you have to acknowledge a sort of divinity to it. When I say acknowledge a divinity to it, it's not like you just high five like, you know, Cupid and like, yeah, you know, I'm aligning with metaphysics, you know, metaphysical, you know, abstraction, you know. It's one of those things that you access your honest self to live an honest life. In living your honest life, as moments go forth and as time allows the show to continue, you will begin maturing through a witnessing of various levels of your sense of self shifting and evolving. And you'll be fascinated and stunned at how many ways that living beings have existed that are influencing you right now. You will see we cannot avoid the cosmic network of intelligent behavior all around the cosmos, because behavior is a sort of network pattern thing. So I'll make this easy. I guess I'll bring this down to earth a bit. Imagine all of existence is a program. Okay, imagine it is a simulation. Now imagine the one who's decided to simulate this program has decided to say that for the behavior of the living beings in this simulated world, I'm going to send waves, some patterns, right? So what I'm saying is that the behavior of us on this planet is not just the behavior of us. There's many other planets. It's just waves going. So from I call it very poetically the central sun, because it's that unknown center of the black hole, you know. So what I mean by that is that it's like very unknown. So I call it the central sun. But I feel there's that from one part of this universal sector, and it's not our planet, but from some part of this universal sector, there's this wave being transmitted, you know, in this simulated existence, right, to all beings in this universe to behave intelligently. Right now, for the longest time, I was like, oh my God, could the sun's light have an influence on our behavior in a subjective way? Right? Could the sun, just like how waves are coming from the sun, we just say, okay, that's just photons. But what if it's not photons? What if our behavior and attitudes on this planet are actually, we are just biological receiving vessels of this vast collective transmission from a point in this universe, you know? And it's not just the universe, it's a multiverse, but I don't want to get into that now, right? From this universal sector, from a part of it, it's as if somebody's pressed the volume too loud and just the speakers wave. beings on many different planets being the same, because it's a sort of transmission, or it's a sort of collectively expressed pattern, right? Now, for me, I find that nature is so smart that it has decided to make itself exist in a way that it has an unknown relationship. Do you know? So what I mean by that is, like, that was a ridiculous statement. Well, let me tell you how I can sum it up. What I mean by that is that as one studies their own self, they begin to comprehend its relationship with everything else considered not to be that self. So you look at what you are, and let's say you're in the mirror, and you look in this mirror, and you're like, okay, I'm seeing something there in the mirror, something physical. That is me. Okay? Now that's then comes into your mind, what if this is a visible effect of an invisible cause, which in some sense a visible body of an invisible mind? Because the mind, if it exists in a unique way that we can classify it, okay, if we consider the mind to be separate, I consider the mind to be a bridge between the body and the soul, but that's another talk, you know. The mind is the world. The world is your whole moment. Your whole moment is a moment. That's it. Because we can witness emptiness, because we are aware of change, there is a changeless presence in a changing personality. In all your birthdays, in every candle you blew, there was a different self blowing that candle, but at the same time, a part of you that was watching it. And in the ancient Vedic tradition, there's this concept of these two birds, this beautiful story, enlightening story of two birds. And it's very simple, you know. And what the story is that there's a person walks, this person's walking, and he suddenly looks at a tree, and he sees something unique on the tree, and he sees that on one branch, on the top branch, there is a bird that's not doing anything, that's just still. And the same kind of bird underneath that bird, okay, on another branch is just busy feeding its kids, doing a lot of things, right? And then this person begins to suddenly realize, oh my God, it's as if the mind is an invisible observer of the body. The mind seems to be like that first bird on the branch, just silently watching all the movement and noise, you know, through its stillness. And then we have the second branch, which is just all the movement. You know, it's all the body and all that, right? It's the busy, egoic life. But the moral of the story is that the true self is neither the bird on the branch, on the top branch or the lower branch. This is why, like, it doesn't matter if you're a fool or a wise man in an eternal game where the solution is to realize you're not even a player, and hence the game is instantly void. What I'm trying to tell you, dear listener, and this might be very funny, but your true self doesn't have to believe anything or disbelieve anything. It's a viewer. Just like how you're hearing me right now, right? You don't have to think about what you're hearing. The words are just, you're hearing it and they're translating into meaning in your mind. So, in other words, in regards to the subtler self and that thing I said at the beginning, that if we were to respond to those neurologists, the idea would come across as this: there is a physical self, there is an objective realm, and then there is an invisible self, you know, or an unknown self. This unknown self exists through what we consider a subjective self. So just like how we have two eyes to see the same, we have one moment with two senses of existence, the subjective self and the objective self. These are being constantly witnessed by one moment as one moment. Now, there's two sorts of imagination. There's a type of imagination that comes on its own, it's situational, and there's some sort of transcendence that, okay, let me say it like this. Shakespeare has this quote where he says, he's talking about greatness, and he says there's some who are born great, there are some who achieve greatness, and there are those who have greatness thrust upon them. This greatness that's thrust upon the being is very profound, because it's kind of like um, the lotus opening. It's kind of like a plant naturally getting there and occurring, right? That's a path to enlightenment, through an observation of how your growth is inseparable with the cosmic expansion of a phenomena, right? So once I realize, oh, I thought I was so special, but I'm just a drop in an ocean with many drops, right? Now it is time. Now it is time as a living being to stop denying your subjective self its true being. And it's going to be scary but exciting. We're going to feel like it's one of those, like, action packed video games, where like a team has to get a job done, but this team is 8 billion living beings, and there's many things occurring, many different games being played by this society, this global society. Well, the greatest value is that you realize how that every living person you've seen from the beginning of your life has been your impression of them, and their impression on their own self is inaccessible. And thus, this is why respect and nobility and honor is important. Without honor, there can be no respect. Without a sort of value for existing in a better way, you cannot exist in a better way. In some sense, trying to access the subjective realm at its pure form requires a complete stillness and silence of the body. So if you want to kind of experience how you are a thought, just stop physically moving, and whatever ideas you get and how your ideas move, that's unique. For me, it's hilarious. A lot of people in meditation classes and whatnot, like the guy, the student says, I'm thinking too much, I can't stop. And the meditation guy is like, okay, just try to think less. Okay, and the problem is, you shouldn't try not to think. You should just become an observer of your thoughts. You want to understand how your mind is moving to be the moment. You have access to the raw, like, people should be inner scientists. That's kind of my approach, that you have to take responsibility to experiment with your own intelligence to figure it out. When I was young and they gave me a Rubik's Cube, like, that thing, like, it was like weird, where I would just wake up every day just trying to solve this thing. And on my own, I would have to use the spirit of randomity, and I would just try different approaches to get there. And eventually, I got to a point where only two of it I couldn't fix. Like, all the colors were made except two. And that's when it's like, later on, somebody showed me an algorithm, and I just memorized the algorithm, and I could do it anytime, you know? Right? But I'm telling you, it was something to engage with. And in your sincere engagement, you get sincere results. In your authentic attention, you get authentic results. Because when you realize life is too short, you don't want to live in an illusion, right? Honestly, my whole intention with these Mr. Within talks is to awaken a very profound self-remembrance of beings on this planet, of a universal responsibility that no longer we can just claim ourselves as human beings, you know, or beings from different countries or whatever. We are universal beings. We're the only ones in this universe. Like the whole room is ours, but we just don't know how to get to other parts of the room, right? We're just stuck. We're in this physical rock, right? I find society must honestly at least develop the system to try to find the proper answers. If we ask the wrong questions, you can be lost forever. That's a way of manipulation. That somebody asks a question, the wrong question. You know, it's like somebody asking Picasso about like cooking. He'll be like, brah, brah, you don't understand. I'm not a cook. Ask me questions about art. But the person's like, no, cooking. Tell me about cooking. You know, how much of that wisdom and knowledge would go to waste by the wrong question? And another way to manipulate someone is just ask them, like, hey, man, you know, did you hear about this incident, and create gossip and rumor and create chaos in other people's lives? You know, that's not correct. You know, the proper handling of oneself must require a responsibility of, let's say, in quotations, their higher self, their soul, or, you know, my view is that your individual unique mission in life eventually dissolves like snow, or in like the ocean, into a collective pattern that just knew where it came from. You're going to remember you're not God, but you are beyond thought, and you're going to abide by different patterns. So pretty much this is very funny, right? This is so funny. As I'm speaking to you right now, like this is how Mr. Within considers it. Um, this is a physical pattern of my existence, and I am not a body. I am like a collective space of being in which this is an aspect of my experience. So imagine that you realize your whole lifetime was, I don't know, maybe like 0.1%, you know, or however many zeros you like, 1% of your actual experience. Because if you only are limited to the to an identity of only a human shape, well, guess what? You're limited. Like, what can you do when somebody sets the chessboard is so important, because if the rules were different, the pieces would feel like their natures are denied. In this science fiction novel that I've written, you know, it's unpublished yet, but it's called The Messenger of Giants. And in this book, there's this multi-dimensional government, multi-universal government called the Enlightened Society, that is administering all of the levels of Earth, all parallel realities of this one Earth, right? I mean, this is going to be hard to explain a bit, but pretty much there's this government called the Enlightened Society. And the Enlightened Society, its whole mission and vision was that because people are temporary creatures, they must be instantly invested in, and they must be helped, and they must be liberated, not liberated only to an ideology. So the Enlightened Society is kind of like a utopic vision of a government in this science fiction novel I wrote. And I'm trying to think where I was going with this for a second. I lost track of thought. pretty much a collective outer force that inspires the individual to attain their greater self, because you no longer think of yourself as an ape but as a caterpillar, where through a metamorphosis your old self dies and instantaneously the new self arises. Because every day I wake up, as far as I can say I am yet who I was yesterday, at the same time I can't, because I have lived a new day. I have had new subtler dimensions be evoked in the ambience of the atmosphere of my hovering witness, hovering consciousness. Pretty much, I'm telling you, beyond language, you're not a story. You're not a creature with a story. You're a creature that no longer requires a story, because the sophistication of the intensity of your experience of the moment arrives at a point where first you think you are a thought. You first think you're a thought that's thinking. Then you begin to see there's something within you that's watching that first thought and the second thought, and is being simultaneously the third thought. So as long as you consider that time is moving forward, you have to constantly consider a new self. Okay. But if you begin to see that it's just in one moment, like, I don't want to say one moment, as if like there's nothing happening, there's nothing moving prior to the concept that time is moving forward. Once you understand that there was something there before that didn't have that definition loses its credibility. I'm saying that in a ridiculous way, but what I mean by that is that you begin to notice that the roots of the tree are going in the soil, which in a soil which you can't see. So you begin to see the uniqueness of how your visible or observable intelligence, right, has its roots within an unknown sort of presence of your moment. So how something is present doesn't necessarily suggest the shape of that creature or the shapelessness of that creature. That means, like, there could, in spirituality, has often entertained this idea that you're pretty much like this eternal sight which doesn't have shape. This just sight, this just moment that is just like a camera in front of a movie, set, just like things are moving in front of it, but the camera is not moving. You begin to see God never had an opinion on its revelation, because God is beyond meaning and no meaning, which what it means is that your greatest conceivable vision of a being is not cannot be sculpted in your vision. You know, when they asked the prophet, uh, perhaps I should start this off in a different way. I asked a Muslim scholar, what did the prophet in Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, say? What did the prophet say about the soul? And the person told me the soul is a secret of God. And I want to kind of say right now, as I'm giving this talk, I kind of noticed anything beyond our sensory existence is a secret. So sensory existence, if I choose to look through a religious framework, means my senses are God's will. That's what religion means. But what is God? God is, for many religious people, not the violent ones you see on TV, the decency and morality to abide by higher value. So believe it or not, this is scary what I'm going to say, but all these wars in history over what I like to call the God or not problem, in the middle of nowhere on a rock in because there was nobody to have those ideas. When scientists say at the moment of the Big Bang, the world was like this pool of energy where something sparked out of it, you know, the idea of existence requires a sort of pre-existence. You know, pretty much what I'm saying is I feel like civilization is an effort of various individuals to cross, and I use the term pilots of consciousness, to pilot beyond the clouds of their individual hallucinations into moments of greater responsibility. I have this vision that in any culture, in any society, the intelligent and responsible will find one another. They will quickly find one another. They are resonating at a higher level of responsibility, you know. And honor without responsibility is nothing. And the greatest responsibility appears to you when you have a sort of divine gratefulness for what exists. There was a time where, believe it or not, I thought I had enemies. In my mind, I was fighting enemies. And I realized what foolishness. But at least I was honest in those moments. And when I say at least I was honest in those moments, because a lot of the spiritual dilemma is, again, that distinction between self-generation and what is actually being received unique to you, separate from you. And so that relationship, the person can tell themselves many stories. And this is why in, for example, Zen Buddhism, there was a teaching where they would say, kill the Buddha. It didn't mean physically, go kill somebody who's like a Buddha. It meant sometimes these people who would very deeply meditate in the sophistication of the elegance of this higher art, they would suddenly think in their past life they were Buddha. And they would come and tell their Zen masters, I'm enlightened, I realize I'm Buddha from another life. And the Zen master would be like, kill the Buddha. The Zen master would be like, don't dare to believe in that idea. Because you will have other ideas. And because endlessly you will have other ideas till the day you die, better observe and try to wonder and study how thoughts appear as phenomena, just like how physical reality appears, and thus come to the conclusion that it is a sort of intersection of a sort of visible spectrum kept by a non-visible dimension. I'm going to say perhaps one of the coolest sentences ever said on this planet. But we are the art of the gods that never existed because we did. Honestly, an eternal being like this was pretty much ancient wisdom. The guy would go to this is ancient mystical wisdom, I find. you know, the guy would go to the guru, just consider the situation. Think of it as a thought experiment. This guy would go to this guru and be like, yo, guru, enlighten me. And because you seem like an enlightened guy, so I don't need to pay you anything, just enlighten me, right? Just a second, guys. The guru would say that the only way you can be enlightened it is to forget who you are and remember, to forget who you were and who you will be, and to truly remember who you are. So let me see, what's a better way to say that? To forget who you are and to remember who you truly are. You have to appreciate yourself as a moment of experience that is manifest, and there's so many children in history who have not been born yet and who have died. And when I say children, I mean everybody's, like, I mean all human beings who've died in the past. History for me, I'm like, what is this? A showcase of like different ways people have killed each other? And then I realized, no, it is the preservation of the first pattern that we as a current generation in 2019 need to pioneer ways where future generations can solve the problems that we couldn't solve now. We have to plant the seeds of a greater world. We have to build the pillars of a new civilization through the one that is still occurring now, which in some sense means the old world is transforming into a new world. And at the same time, the moment it transforms into a new world, it was always destined to be a new world. So the old world has no fear. Because the eternal acknowledgement of the self of selves has come to itself. So what that means is Swami Krishnananda, this Vedic yogi, he would say, religion is God remembering himself, which was always like, oh my God. Like, it was like so intense when I heard that, because it's as if like man thinks there is God, but God thinks he is man. Do you see what I mean? What is it? Like, damn, that probably made it more complex. What I'm trying to say is that it's as if there never were human beings. We're all God, and God is remembering himself through religious people. you know? Um, which sounds incredibly, odd, but seems to be a sort of display of a collective intelligence trying to live through individuals. As if we're not only individual beings on this planet, there's collective beings. And a collective being needs expression through an individual being. But if an individual realizes they're a collective being, then the collective being is also them. They are not just a collective being. So that's when you become, uh, rather than the character in the video game, you become the programmer that's writing the video game. And then you attain greater responsibility through a sort of, this was kind of like the tip, like, yogis would give one another when they would have discussions of metaphysical nature, where it would be like neti neti, neti neti neti, like not this, not this, not this. Smile at your moment of manifestation. Realize you're the one dressing up your ideas into whatever fashion that your energy levels and your excitement or your attention takes you to. If there is a chance that we are, as all matter is a visible effect of an invisible cause, it's as if two sides of the coin have to acknowledge they are the same coin. When you look at cause and effect, you're looking at those two ideas in one moment, right? That means the cause is the effect in some sense, and the effect is the cause. There is a level of there's a common denominator in regards to in regards to their existential presence conceptually, the distinction of the cause and the effect. So again, the two eyes that see the same. That invisibility to itself has no meaning. So what that means is only to a person who has not realized they are a soul, only to a person that, oh man, let me say it again. You are your next moment, and your next moment is ultimate freedom. Much blessings and all.